Gather around, everyone, for a reading of The Secrets of Terra, Silenti, Chapter 1. This is my book, originally published in 2014 by Exlibris, and revised fairly recently as of June 17, 2020. This was a book that I wrote out of boredom one year, and I rediscovered my love for writing. And without further ado, let's just get into it. Chapter 1. Terra Silenti. Years have passed. Images, events pass into memory, to history, to myth, to tale. There are few today who still remember what happened, how it happened. Through years of recording, the truth was distorted. Men alive during the time of great trials are dead. So too are the dwarves and halflings. There are only so many elves who can recall that time. Only those who still live remember. Legends pass, like the legend of Cora, the Ranger Princess. Eula, the one who drove Decrepin Tower out of the land of the elves. The kings and queens, Gergo, Arenia, and Krillian, now live. For nearly 4,000 years, the fires Decrepin Tower built were now gone, long forgotten. The ancient ruins of Terra Silenti remain silent, waiting to be disturbed. Many treasures were associated with this once great city, but it was never found, for those who ventured into the deep wilderness never returned. It was assumed from that time that such a ruin no longer existed, and the people who went searching died from starvation, thirst, goblins, bandits, or even accidents. Their skeletons litter the grounds of the forest that surrounds where the ancient city was presumed to be. Until now, the ruins remained undisturbed. There was a woman who wore a green cloak who stood over the basin of Terra Silenti. The moss-covered ground like a thick bed of wet grass all the way to the city walls. The walls extended to the blackened sky, mist coming out of the stone walls from various collapsed parts. The walls were made of thick gray stone, such as that used in the grand halls of the dwarfs. Much of the city walls were also taken back by the forest, with no one to care for it. The vines and trees began to regrow inside. She carefully walked down the mossy basin, feeling much of the squishy surface through her toes. She carefully observed her surroundings before entering through a crack in the wall. It was damn near impossible to see anything, and the mist inside was so thick, like a heavy fog on the road, where even light would only impede her vision further. She raised a hand, and the mist began to fade away, revealing the damage the city took years before. Some of the remains of the houses appeared burned, while many skeletal remains lay strewed across the streets. The skeletons no longer held their white, healthy color. However, having turned yellow and green in some parts, the dye receded from the mossy ground. She walked through the ground and threw her hands up in the air, crying, "Decrepin Tower, give unto me the strength you gave me before. Call forth and give me the will to raise up the dead in your glorious name." A dark purple light emitted from her hands and touched the skies, crackling like lightning, and purple lightning veined the sky in all directions. She became the epicenter of the storm. Smoke filled the air, and the creatures from the ground rose. The groaning of the dead and bones upon bones filled the air. She turned to the dead and nodded. The storm subsided. "Thank you, Lord Decrepin Tower, Prince of the world," she said. She proceeded to walk through the city until she came to the castle, greeting many of the dead as she walked by. The castle could not protect itself from the forces of nature without anyone to care for it. The castle was covered in vines and mold, emitting an age-old, indescribable stench. Part of the huge double doors were rotted away. She pushed the doors open and beheld the throne room. She observed the scene, pushed the skeleton king off the throne, and took a seat. The skeleton came apart, his crown rolling down the aisle as it collapsed on the ground. "A king, was it?" she asked, talking to the skeleton she did not raise. "Ah, I remember you. You were the foolish king. Trust is for the dead, is it not? You trusted me in your foolishness, and look at you now. You're just as much a fool in death as you were in life. But you shall serve my will." She stood up and raised the skeleton with a spell. Her hand propped up and formed a purple ball in her hand, and the stream of purple air flowed from her hand to the skeleton until it rose from the ground. It picked up his crown and took its seat back on the throne. She turned to the wall on the right side and observed small cracks that made the shape of a door. She pushed the wall in and beheld a room with an empty fountain. "A pool," she mused. "It is indeed the pool of foreseeing. I think I shall change this." She reached her hand over it and chanted, "Girtu litnu forti." The fountain was being filled with a mysterious thick green fluid. It filled up at the top and emitted a glow into the room. The woman gave a small smile, saying, "A pool of seeing no more. Now you are a pool of despair and curses. See that you remain corrupted." She left the room. She walked back to the throne, and in between it and the chair of judging was a lever. She pulled it, and a passage was revealed. It was dark, and the smell of carcasses filled the air. Truly, the prisoners died there when it was left abandoned. The passage led downward, and she followed it. She lit the long, dark torches along the walls as she passed by, coming to the dungeon moments later. She beheld many locked cages. The remains of the prisoners lay there, just as she presumed. "Serves you right. After the dishonor and desecration of my body, you shall serve against your will." She rose the dead. They remained stuck inside the cells. She let out a chuckle and continued down the halls. The corpses let their limbs hang dangling from the cells in their stench, their eyes emotionless and blank, nothing more than black orbs in those sockets. She went down even further, following the dark and rocky corridor. She hurried and entered a dark room, so dark that the catacombs could barely be seen, rather only mistaken for a simple rock structure. She drew a sword with a light green blade, which gave off a light throughout the entire room. There were pillars full of tombs. Some lay on the walls, much like the bunks in the barracks. She continued walking through the catacombs, admiring the thousands of dead. She entered a small room with few chairs laid out at a table. She moved them around the corner. A study, perhaps. But whose? The room was full of stone, just as the doors were. She opened the second door and slammed it shut. She continued down a long, narrow hallway, again just as dark as the rest of the place. She chanted a spell. Litnu. The torches on the hallway and the rest of the place instantly lit up. So these halls are much longer. I wonder if the king of old knew how much these halls were here, she said to herself. She sheathed her sword and continued walking along the hall. She opened a door and entered another room with a large boulder in the middle of it. There were 3 doorways. She went down all the way to the left and walked deeper into the gloom. The air grew heavier with every step. She felt its weight pressed down on her, but it did not deter her. At the end of the hall was a room, and it was full of golden treasure. A vast amount of it lay on the floor in chests and glimmered on the wall. Gold? The root of greed, I think. Or was it? I cannot remember. But not my vice, was it? That belonged to Avara, that poor, miserable wretch. She turned her back on the gold and went back up to the room. She welcomed the air as it seemed to normalize under ordinary pressure. This place must have been nearly 1,000 feet below the surface of the basin. She entered the next corridor. This narrow passage went deeper. It was much narrower. She began to lose her patience. A virtue, but not to her. Damn these lengthy halls. She found another room, again large and dark. There were no torches to be lit here. She took out her sword and brought a small light to the place. It was very empty and contained many huts of the sort. There were many other wooden structures that went along the place, seeming to stretch for miles and miles. This looks rather promising, she mused. Her patience returned and she continued across the barren, dark room. She looked around, hoping to find something else, but so far there was nothing. There was, however, a small room with a mysterious red light emanating from it. She walked into the room and beheld a bright red orb standing on a pedestal. Going over it, she placed her hands around it. Feeling a surge of power, she resisted. Red lightning filled the room, and she could feel the flesh return to her fingers. Such immense power! Decrepit tower. Yes, Ficino. Have you reclaimed Terra Silenti? His voice echoed across the halls. The ground shook with his powerful voice. It is the first step. The others are regaining their control over the areas now, even as we speak. Is it reclaimed? Yes, master, she answered, staring deep into the orb. The dungeons of this place run deep, and I am exploring these halls now. I have just found this, and I'll give you all I have to offer. And I expect nothing less, boomed his voice. I'm proud of you. When the time comes, we will strike. I want you to know that what you do here is crucial. If you fail here, we will not. I'll not let you down, master. Explore the ruins you made all those years ago as you wish, but heed my call when it comes. It will come. Eventually. She nodded and left the room. She went through the dark halls and through the wooden structures. Going back up, she found another room, an office it seemed. There was a desk with a few parchments and a quill with an inkwell. They were seemingly untouched, and she carefully took off the cobwebs and blew off the dust. She pushed in the chair, and underneath it was a book. She held it in the air to examine it. I'll look at this later. She put it in one of the drawers and locked it. Continuing through the hall, she came to another lit room. The floor was covered with a green fog. Another tomb, perhaps. She looked around to the left and to the right and found little or nothing worth looking at. She went up the stairs and was welcomed by the warmth of daylight. She took it in and said, Wonderful light. 'Tis such a shame this world will know the light no more, as the darkness will cascade over all creation. Unvertus. You will pay dearly for what you did to us. She went back into the dungeon of Terra Silenti. She remained there for years, studying, turning the traps and spells of the ancient city to her advantage. No one would disturb her without her knowing it first. Years went by and people would stumble upon the ruins, and she made sure that none of them escaped, and none would ever see the light again. This has been a reading of The Secrets of Terra Silenti, available on Amazon Kindle, published through Ex Libris. So yeah, again, this was just the first chapter. This is not the whole thing. It can be very Very confusing with the first chapter, as it doesn't appear that much has been revealed aside from there is some kind of revenge story involved. All right, the back of the book says, Keck, once a proud wood elf, has left his homelands, his friends, and what was left of his family. Abandoning all his ties, burning his bridges, knowing perfectly well he couldn't return home, he settled in the town of Malitu, a month's journey up north out of the woodlands called Kinasa, home to the wood elves. He took up what he knew, hunting, and started his new life and lived among men. In the world and of the world, he slowly lost himself until one last hunting trip that would force him to go back into Kinasa and find out who he truly is. With the help of some friends, old and new, discover the ancient remains of a forgotten city and an ancient evil from within, one of the lesser evils from the time of great trials, with even more perilous adventures to come. All right, if this is at all intriguing, I will include a link to where to get this, both on paperback as well as ebook. Again, this is available on Kindle. It is not Kindle Unlimited, unfortunately, but I will continue to be reading this on a more consistent basis for anyone who's interested. All right, now without further ado, enjoy the rest of your Thursday. Don't do anything crazy. Peace.